Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Quick Build Strategies for Safer Multimodal Streets webinar. My name is Paula Hyman from the Ohio LTAP Center, and I'll be your technical support for today. Just a couple of housekeeping items. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please type them into the questions pod, and our presenter will address your questions periodically. This webinar is being recorded, and providing that the recording is successful, the YouTube link and a copy of the presentation will be emailed to all participants and uploaded to our LTAP website. I want to thank you in advance for your participation with that, and I'll pass things off to Ms. Caitlin Harley, Active Transportation Manager here with ODOT.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. My name is Kate Harley. I'm the Active Transportation Manager at ODOT here working within our Highway Safety Program. I'm really excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Quick Build Strategies for Safer Multimodal Streets. Today's webinar is all about projects that can be implemented quickly in order to improve safety and connectivity for some of our most vulnerable roadway users, those walking and biking. Vulnerable roadway user safety is of critical importance as we work to eliminate fatalities and serious injuries on roadways in Ohio. Over the past 5 years, on average, vulnerable roadway user involved crashes in Ohio were 9 times more likely to result in a fatality or a serious injury than a non-vulnerable roadway user involved crash. And then finally, today's webinar is all about addressing these trends quickly. So as we work to improve safety, there really is an urgency to improve our built environment rapidly, to use all the tools in the toolbox, including semi-permanent projects that improve safety today while we work to advance permanent solutions tomorrow. So what are quick build projects? Quick build projects are a semi-permanent, easily maintained, and quickly implemented form of project that can be used to accelerate multimodal projects and inform permanent project design. So this webinar today will provide an overview of the quick build method for engineers. You'll learn about key considerations for design and implementation, as well as effective quick build case studies in Ohio. And then finally, we have time at the end for Q&A. So just another reminder to submit your questions throughout the webinar to the questions pod, and we'll utilize those in the Q&A at the end of the webinar. We're joined by 2 engineers from Tool Design Group who will be facilitating the webinar today. The first is Michelle Danilla, Director of Engineering Operations at Tool Design. Michelle has a broad civil engineering background that includes transportation planning, traffic analysis, safety analysis, and roadway and intersection design. As Tool Design's Director of Engineering Operations for North America, Michelle strives to improve safety for all roadway users, especially people walking, biking, and taking transit. Michelle has worked on roadway and intersection design projects throughout the US and is skilled in taking designs from concept through construction. During her career, she has worked in both the public and private engineering sectors, and she recently served as a Massachusetts DOT's Complete Streets engineer. This background gives her a unique perspective on project management and project development. And then second is Mariel Coleman, a project engineer too and planner with Tool Design. As an experienced planner and engineer, Mariel is uniquely qualified in delivering quick build projects, as these projects require both an understanding of feasibility as well as how best to leverage funding to quickly improve and expand pedestrian and bicycle networks. As the author of state and local design guidance, she draws upon her knowledge of design best practices, network planning, and final construction document experience. She has served as the project manager for one of ODOT's pedestrian safety improvement program pilot projects, which streamlined the design process to plan, design, and implement safety improvements at over 70 intersections for Toledo, Ohio. So thanks again to our speakers, and I'll pass it over to Tool Design to kick us off.
Thank you, Kate. All right, so this is Michelle here. We're going to kick it off with the audience poll just to get a sense of where the audience is and your backgrounds and your knowledge of quick builds. So if you can go ahead and fill out what your primary role is, that would be great.
Couple more seconds, we're at 87% who voted.
Great. So we have a very high engineering audience. So that is great to see, and welcome to our planners and others. We have a second poll that's going to pop up about your familiarity with quick build projects. So you can go ahead and select one of those. We'll give it a minute here to populate. All right, so we have some folks that have never heard of it, as well as some that are looking to understand the difference. And we do have a 11% that have implemented one. So great, this is a great sense of the audience here. All right, so we're going to start off with the descriptions of why quick build and what they are. So Kate talked a little bit about this, but our street infrastructure was really built with an emphasis on moving cars and vehicles, and that took decades to build. And now, decades later, we're dealing with wide roads, high vehicular speeds, a lack of infrastructure for people walking and biking, as well as environmental impacts, negative environmental impacts. So those are just a few of what we're trying to address here. And we don't have decades to rebuild our street network. So quick build projects allow us to address roadway safety in weeks or months rather than several years. It also allows communities to see and experience the modifications in a temporary configuration before you make that full investment with permanent changes. So we do have a range of project types in our toolkit, and we, in the question mentioned pop-ups or pilots, quick builds, and then permanent. And so pop-ups and pilots are on the shorter duration projects. A pop-up may be a couple hours to a day or a week, or a couple of weeks. A pilot could be a little bit longer. You maybe test something out for 6 months. And then quick builds are really geared to last a year to 5 years, and they're good to last. They last that time period that it would take to design the permanent design and obtain that funding to implement that permanent design. So here's an example from Pittsburgh where you can see on the left is a temporary traffic circle that was installed in 2019, and that uses plants in plastic pots as well as some flex posts and a sign. And a year later, they went back to that same intersection and they were able to put in a curb, a kind of landscaped area, and make that permanent. So that's kind of that example of doing it quickly in a temporary material and then being able to build it permanently in the future. Oops, wrong way, apologize. So the approach for quick builds should really be simple. Be clear and honest with what the purpose is. Are you aiming to shorten pedestrian crossings similar to this image here? Are you looking to add bicycle facilities? Are you looking to reduce vehicle speeds, enhance visibility for pedestrians at a crosswalk? Those are some of the purposes that you may be looking to do a quick build project. Once you have that clear understanding of what the purpose is, then maximize what you have access to. Use the materials that you can easily get. Maybe you have a contractor on board that can do flex posts, or maybe your sign shop can produce some signs. Use what you're familiar with and best for your community. Also engage the community, have them help develop the concepts, think through what you want, what you're trying to achieve and how you should achieve that. Um, Design for the equipment and maintenance equipment that you already have, and don't, try to think of making new maintenance plans or buying new equipment. Test it with the equipment you have and see how that goes. And then we always recommend that you monitor and evaluate it after install, to make sure that you can, make revisions or tweaks that you need to before you do that permanent design. So here's kind of outlines a typical process, and we'll cover some of these topics in detail as we advance through this presentation, but we really recommend that you work together with your peer departments and agencies, bringing in, planning and engineering and public works and fire, police, operations. Having everybody's perspective really can help when you're selecting a site or determining the purpose. It also helps as you're thinking through material selection, who has access to what. It also, by bringing in police, you can have that emergency response, thoughts and opinions, and right there up front. It allows everyone to be on the same page. You can go out and do a site visit, develop a concept plan, really look at that existing conditions and what you're trying to accomplish. And then again, depending on your staffing, you may be able to do this with an in-house designer, or you may hire a consultant to help you with that concept. Next, it's best to really think through those materials. Once you have that purpose, you have that concept, start to think through what you have access to. Do you have a contractor on call that you are able to tap into for markings and posts and signs, for example? Do you have staff on hand at your community that can go out and do these installs? Think through how best to get this implemented, and you can always go out to bid as an individual project or as a group of projects if you need to get a contractor on board. That really helps. Understanding how you're going to install it as you're developing that concept will really help determine what materials are in your toolkit and what you have access to. Then you can finalize the plans, make sure that fire department, everyone's on board, maintenance are on board with what you're trying to do. And then the fun begins. You get to install it, you get to see it, and you get to see people using it, experiencing it, and then also reviewing it and evaluating it, making sure that you're asking people is it working as you envisioned, how's their experience. And we recommend that you really evaluate it shortly after, roughly like 1 or 2 weeks, to get that initial reaction, and then visit again, 2, 3, 4 months later to make sure that it's still working. Another quick build benefit is that you can adjust it. So if the fire department does have a tricky time getting that truck down the road, you can make those tweaks as needed, for example. Public and stakeholder engagement really should be throughout this entire process. It's a great project type to engage the public and have them really part of the discussion every step of the way, talking through the purpose, coming up with the concept. You can discuss materials. Sometimes there's a neighborhood association that's willing to buy the plants or work with you to get some of those materials as well. So engaging the community and those stakeholders and abutters early can really help make this process streamlined for everyone. So here's kind of a quick site selection of some ideas as to what you maybe think, if you're thinking about your community right now, and some areas that you may want to do a quick build project. Where are your high crash locations, especially for people walking and biking? Are you trying to build a bike network? Is there a bike facility road that's kind of an easy lift, that you have the space that you can make that marking now? Think about schools, children accessing school. School crossings are a great place to look. Trail crossings, intersections that have a lot of pavement, you can see here. Can you stripe that out, narrow that down, as well as traffic calming. We talked about traffic circles, speed cushions, that type of stuff. Think through your network of streets and where these priorities may lie. So we're going to jump into kind of some of the design considerations. So unfortunately, every project is unique and different. Every site is unique and different. Every intersection is unique and different. So there isn't one solution for all, but making sure that you're thinking about the safety of the users on the roadway, the scale of your project, where is it, making sure that it's still accessible for everyone, regardless of walking, biking, if you're in a wheelchair, using a mobility device, making sure that it's clear and understandable for them. Think through your context where people are trying to go. And then, as I mentioned, the maintenance. Sorry, there's like a little bit of a delay when I try to switch here. I apologize. Okay. So for design considerations, think about feasibility, what will work best at the site that you've picked, generate that site plan. As I mentioned, have that engage that fire department, make sure that it works for emergency vehicles. Think through the materials, the durability, the maintenance, and we'll get into some of this in a few slides. And then, as always, your designs still need to be compliant to the Ohio MUTCD, the multimodal guide, thinking through the ADA standards, general roadway standards we still want to adhere to, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next few slides as well. So we want to make sure that you're thinking through your site and your existing conditions and making sure that you're solving one problem and not creating another. And so think through how if you have loop detectors, sometimes we shift travel lanes, and so those loop detectors also need to be shifted. Think through your transit, and if you have a bus stop, how will the bus be accessed? And some of those routine, trash routes, accessibility, that type of stuff. As I mentioned, coordination is key, making sure that you're talking to all your departments, stakeholders, and that's true of all departments, making sure they're aware of what's going on. If you're looking to do a location near a school, engaging that school, it can be really beneficial to the project as well. We want the community to embrace these treatments, so making sure that they look good, and that's where we don't want them to just look like you put a bunch of Jersey barriers down. We want it to make sure that it's reflective of the community, and that's where those neighborhood associations or business associations can really help bring that aesthetics look, and they really care about that. So that's a great engagement tool that you can work with. And making sure that they're part of the entire process is really beneficial for the community. It helps them kind of understand and be honest at the beginning of what you're doing. We want to test this for a future permanent position or project. And so making sure that you're upfront and honest with, we want to test this, we want your feedback, we want to hear from you, and bringing them along throughout the entire process. So I mentioned we're going to jump into kind of some of the materials that can be used, and there's a variety. And like I said, whatever you have access to, and we'll talk about resources at the end a little bit. But there's flexible bollards, and those you can see here the time frame of how long these things can typically last. Some places use granite blocks. You can see that on the image in the middle on the bottom. There's some that have used, Jersey barriers. They've painted them. You can see that New York City example on the top. I mentioned plastic planters is another option, or there's some that are a little more expensive, but you can get kind of self-watering planters, and those are some of the typical options that we've seen for barriers for these types. We also, obviously do a lot of traffic control signs. Signs should adhere to the MUTCD, the ODOT MUTC, the Ohio MUTCD. They should be retroreflectivity and meet all of those standards for the traffic control signs. When we do quick builds, there's a lot of times that we're trying to do informative or educational signs, or trying to get feedback and directing the public if they have any feedback to provide. They can scan that QR code or visit the website. And so these signs, you should make sure they don't distract drivers and users of the road, but these can be a little bit more DIY. We've done the printed on the plastic and zip tied them to posts. So these can be a little bit more laminated and attached to a utility pole or something. So make sure that you're thinking through engagement of people that are using it, and these signs can give you a little bit more flexibility for these projects. For lines and symbols, there's a variety of paint types that you can use, from epoxy to thermoplastic, and they all have different service lives. Depending on the length of your project, you may consider a tape option, but these are kind of a good description of some of those material types that you can come back to as we're going through, if you're come back to these slides. For the stripings, just a few tips. It's important that the markings adhere to Ohio's manual, the MUTCD. Edge lines, even if you're doing a quick build project, edge lines should still be white. Center lines should be yellow. We should make sure that our crosswalks are high visibility so that they are, you're getting the best style, and making sure that they're visible, especially at night. Buffers should still be marked in the right way so that they're deflecting users back into their travel lane. And those are just kind of a few examples about what to think about as you're striping these out. Here's just kind of a quick example of some our toolkit, for lack of a better word. We want to think, when you're thinking about a quick build project, here's kind of some of the things, we mentioned about high crash locations. Well, what can I do? Think about adding bike facilities, that's separated bike facilities, narrowing that crossing, adding a crossing island with posts, adding, rapid flashing beacons or warning signs. You can narrow intersections. You can add some transit facilities. You could add a floating bus stop or a bus lane. Talked about traffic circles as well as some traffic calming. So there's some, I mentioned about maintenance consideration, thinking through snow removal and the equipment you have and how much clearance you need between that buffer and that curb, and making sure that you're having those conversations at the start. Also thinking through drainage and what your material type, and making sure that that material is not impacting the flow of water, making sure that water can still get to where it needs to go, whether that's a drain, a catch basin, or over to a grassed area. We've mentioned all the different material types and thinking through the durability of those, and how long and how often you need to go out and replace, or if there's plants, who's watering those, so that it does look nice. Making sure that you're thinking through what your staff needs are, and so that you're setting yourself up for success. The last thing I wanted to talk about was kind of the cost of all of this, and making sure that you're thinking through, if you're buying a bulk of materials, where you can store and keep those until you implement these projects. What are those materials? What are the costs associated to that? Whether you're doing that in-house or hiring a consultant, there's a cost associated, could be a cost associated to that. We mentioned your staffing levels. And also thinking through, you may need police details when this is getting installed. So thinking through all those little details and making sure that you're aware at the start of kind of what your community is committing to do. So I'm going to pass it off to Mariel now to jump into some of these other parts of the process.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And as you were talking through that, it was reminding me of a community we were working with recently that actually got big planters from an arborist. The trees that they were getting would come in these big planters, and so they were getting these for free and then painting them and putting in native plants for their community. So I thought I'd share that since I thought it was a great way to like use, one man's trash is another man's treasure, and get some free materials and be creative like that. And um, the to reiterate what Michelle said about the signing and striping, sometimes you have volunteers implementing these and they don't have the MUTCD memorized. So I've seen bike lanes with yellow markings and curb extensions with the transverse markings going the wrong way or the wrong color. So that it may seem like really obvious, but depending on who you have out there installing that, um, they're not always as in touch with those and don't understand sometimes the reasons why we need that consistency in our traffic control devices. So any kind of image or prep for them is important in making sure these are installed correctly the first time, and are there for the however long they are, until you have something maybe different put in later on. So jumping into the outreach and evaluation side of this, um, you know, these projects, quick builds are really a two-way conversation throughout their life. There's not a lot of other um, examples in our work that's like this, and a lot of times we're doing engagement, which leads to design, and then we install it, and we move on to our next project. So we need to think about these just a little bit differently, both in terms of how we message, but also about the opportunity that this provides to advance and adapt our transportation network as we learn and help our community be a little bit more hands-on and involved in this process. So opening day is not when the work ends. There's often new signs, new pavement markings, new operations. It could be the first time your community's seen something like a separated bike lane. So people are going to be unfamiliar with this infrastructure. And Michelle talked about some of those more like DIY signs that can be up for that first 6 months. And those are the kinds of things we want to think about, like how do we want to educate people that are going to be using this street to help them figure it out so it's not stressful, and they feel like there's a place to go to ask questions. And we're always striving to make our designs intuitive, but inevitably somebody's going to wonder what that new bicycle signal means, whether that's them as the bicyclist or as the driver as well. I remember the first time I saw a bike box and I biked home and then Googled, like, how do I use that thing? So we want to make sure that that's like accessible for people to understand how to use it. And then turns can often be like, how do I make this turn, or how do I park if we're installing a separated bike lane? And a great way to handle your education is to combine it with some of your education as it's installed. So you can create sort of a street team, as some other communities have done, to help educate people on how to interact with that new infrastructure. And there's some photos of some street teams in other communities doing just that. They talked with people who were walking, biking, getting on and off the bus, or people driving and navigating those streets, and help them understand what their responsibilities were to themselves and to others. People could ask questions. They also had handouts, so if people were just passing and didn't have time to talk, They could take some learning materials away. They also have prepared scripts for their 311 operators. So you never know where your questions are going to go to, and their 311 operators were prepared to answer a lot of the common questions. In Calgary, their street team had over 20,000 conversations with residents and visitors in their first year alone. And it really helped make the changes go smoother. They got a really rich data set of um, feedback from the community. And they also offered ride-alongs to support people just trying it out, seeing what it's like. You know, sometimes it's nice to have that buddy the first time you're trying out a new facility. So tons of different ways that you can organize and both educate while you're gaining valuable information about how this is working and how you might want to change it in the future. So a couple of principles to keep in mind. These are going to be new for a lot of people. Like I said, what other model do we have of this in our public service world? So creating awareness about what quick build projects are, what their strengths are, what their limitations are is going to be important in gaining trust and then creating a more collaborative public process. So messaging about how we want to do this, we want to get you access to this quickly. It may not look like all of our other projects, but that's a good thing because it gives us an opportunity to all learn and grow this system together. Performance measures are really important both before and after to give an honest assessment of the outcomes, what went well, what didn't work as expected, what could be improved. And this can be really handy support for city staff and our elected officials to show why they're going to move forward with designs, more permanent installations in the future. You know, not everyone's going to be always on board with everything that goes on. So having data supporting why you're doing something can be really valuable in showing why this is going to be implemented the way it is. And then we talked about surveys, or I'd rather say interviews, because I think the key is really talking to people. Surveys don't allow for sometimes that open-ended feedback, and they can be very like directed. So having a in-person discussion or even a virtual one can be really valuable. And then lastly, you know, community groups can serve as an extension of the team, and we can get funding to help staff our projects using some of those community groups for the engagement and education. And honestly, sometimes the best messenger or best engagement person is not you. The kind of conversations I have with, you know, ambiguous person of my city is very different than I might have with a trusted local leader. So you may have much richer conversations whenever you're getting people out that know the community and can get some candid feedback from them as well. So here's a list of different performance measures that you may want to consider to help document your actions, results, feedback, and also how all of this informed any future work that you're proposing. And these should really be tailored based on the goals and desired outcomes of the project to measure how good this project is at accomplishing your goals and outcomes. Also can be used to address community concerns. So parking can be a hot topic. What's the travel time changes? You know, measuring things like this can be a way to say, you know, we want to try this. We're going to measure those things that you voice that you're concerned about and publicize that and continue this conversation can help to alleviate some of the concerns you'll get with all of these kinds of projects. And then here's an example of potentially how to report out some of that in a more engaging way. This is from the city of Calgary. So, we've got kilometers on here. You could do that too if you want to teach the metric system. But in general, I like this graphic because it's like interesting to read. And, during planning projects, we've found that graphics throughout plans mean people are more likely to read them too. Stats are more digestible. So anything you can do to make these more accessible to the community, more relatable, is fantastic. But at the end of the day, tracking the data is the most important thing, and being transparent about what you've collected and what those stats are. So we do have a couple of case studies to go over with you that are both in Ohio. We wanted to give you some in your own backyard because I think it's always helpful to say, we're doing this in Ohio, it's relatable, it's consistent with other standards and guidance in our state, and you can do it too. So the first one is Mount Vernon Avenue, which is a street in the Bronzeville neighborhood in Columbus. And the project originally started out as a feasibility study to determine a preferred alternative to address several goals of the community. This area has had some of the highest census tracts of no or one-car households, so very reliant on walking and transit in the area. There's also some crashes that were concerning to the community as well. So the project goal was to conduct a feasibility study and then do something a little bit more shorter, like a demonstration or the pop-up that Michelle described earlier. So really just intended to be in place for a couple of weeks and get some feedback on the preferred alternative, and then implement this project. But the implementation of this was going to take 3 to 5 years to fund, design, and construct. And given some of the speeding and safety concerns, the city decided to pivot and instead use that funding they had for the demonstration to do some quick build interventions that aren't necessarily the two-way separated bike lane that was the preferred alternative, but things that would be happening later on anyway, and that could in the short term have a impact on the safety here and improving safety. So the goal of this quick build was to reduce speeding and crashes, enhance some of the neighborhood aesthetics. The time frame was, the feasibility study was over a year, but really once the decision was made to do this quick build, it took about 3 months to draw up some plans and get it installed. So very rapid time frame. And then some of the treatments that were included in this were traffic control at intersections, high visibility crosswalks. There was parking on both sides of the street, but it wasn't delineated. So adding a striped lane to kind of give that visual narrowing. And then curb extensions, which you can see in this photo here that had flex posts behind that painted curb extension. So here's some more examples of before and after. Speeding was a really big issue. You can tell it's a very wide street here. So like I mentioned, the parking wasn't striped, so it kind of looks like you just have these really big lanes. And I think it also discouraged people from parking here because people were going, I think the 85th was around 40 miles per hour in a posted 25 mile per hour area. So people were having their mirrors whacked and not wanting to park on the street, which also, then means it's easier to speed as well. So adding in the curb extensions help to narrow the roadway. Also, those parking lanes as well. And then this was a intersection that was of particular concern. There was a signal that was here, and when it was removed, it was changed to a two-way stop control. And then there was a lot of near misses. When we did a site visit, there was a ton of debris around the intersection. So we could tell that there was a lot of like property damage crashes. There were sight distance issues, so we were seeing people creep really far into the intersection to try to see, to make a decision if they could turn. And this was a really big concern for the public. The school's not that far away. And again, we have a lot of people walking and accessing transit. There's 2 transit stops at this intersection. So this really just could not wait 3 to 5 years due to the safety risk. And they were able to go ahead and install this project. We were the designers for this. We put together signing and marking sheets, and their maintenance crews actually installed this project. And they had a lot of these materials on hand that they were able to use to get this built. And you can even see they didn't want to drive the stop signs into the existing pavement, and especially knowing that this is going to eventually change to that 2-way separated bike lane. So they've got some temporary ways of showing their traffic control that are working to show that updated traffic control. And some project outcomes here, crashes were reduced significantly. Approximately 65% of fatal injury crashes were reduced by roughly 83%. And then you can also see some of the interventions that achieve 2 to 4 mile per hour reduction throughout, which may not sound like, it may sound like a lot to you, it may not sound like a lot to you. It depends on your understanding of the traffic calming devices, but I wanted to post what FHWA has on what you can expect a curb extension to do, and they say 1 to 4 miles per hour. So they are performing within what we expect them to, but we're still not seeing a ton of parking on this street. I think there's more now that it's delineated and people don't feel like their cars will get hit, but that's still allowing that kind of wider feeling. And so adding potentially more curb extensions in the future, obviously with the bike lanes coming in, that will really help narrow that roadway. So definitely the interventions were effective, but as you can see, the speed limits, the 85th percentiles are still high. And that's the beauty of the quick build. We started with these couple of interventions and can understand how well they're performing. And sometimes we have to go back in and layer some additional treatments once we see what these ones were able to do. The second case study we have is Clifton Ave in Cincinnati. And this was a really wide street, about 70 feet. It did have 20,000 vehicles per day. And this project was kicked off as a neighborhood effort. So there's a local neighborhood group, Clifton Town meeting, that envisioned having a bikeway along this. And they brought together a lot of different stakeholders to make this happen. And got funding from Devu Good Foundation. And they determined that for this roadway, a two-way bike lane was feasible due to the street characteristics. Before they implemented it, there were 2 northbound travel lanes, 2 southbound travel lanes, and then parking along the sides, and they reallocated one of the northbound travel lanes to add that bikeway. So this was their process. Started out with a demonstration project, then piloted it, and now they're thinking about that permanent project installation later on. Some of the challenges were they did need to make some design exceptions. With the nature of the quick builds, they weren't able to implement every one of their preferred design treatments for the intersections. In some cases, it maybe wasn't as intuitive as they would have liked, but that's sometimes how we have to implement these, is what will work, how can we educate, and knowing that we're going to address these later on. So there was also some building construction happening that they had to coordinate with to make sure that there was still access for those construction vehicles, but also making sure cyclists were safe. And really, that's a story we all are familiar with. Our cities are ever evolving. There's always construction. So knowing what the plan is if we do need to close a lane or shift the bicyclist in the future conditions as well was something that they ran into quickly on this project and had to think about. As far as project outcomes, the phased approach did allow for some more incremental evaluation and minor tweaks between some of their phases. Police observed that there was some visibility and sight distance issues at a couple of intersections, so they removed an additional parking spot as well. Before the paths were in place, 55% of the cars would speed, sometimes up to 73 miles per hour in a 35 mile per hour zone. And afterwards, the number of speeders has reduced to 29% of cars. So big reduction there. The volume of motorists driving faster than 40 miles per hour, which is 5 miles per hour over the speed limit, fell by 43% after the protected bike lanes were installed. And a quote I have from one of the people involved in the project is, "The success of Clifton Avenue then in turn resulted in improvements to Central Parkway, the city's other existing protected bike lane on Mill Creek Road. New high visibility pylons were installed and concrete parking blocks followed to increase the safety and prevent illegal parking in the bike lane." So lots of positive outcomes of this project, and the ability to learn through this process on how to continue evolving and bring this to other parts of the city as well. I'm going to try to go through these resources quickly too to make sure we get to any questions you all have, but we did want to point out a couple of resources available at your fingertips. As we mentioned earlier, while it may be a shorter term intervention, it might be an interim treatment, we still need to follow best practices, and the Multimodal Design Guide has guidance on facility selection for bike and ped facilities, as well as the design of those facilities, including traffic control. Hopefully you have a plan with prioritization that can help you focus on what projects should be considered for quick builds. But if you don't have a plan, or if it's out of date, the Multimodal Design Guide can help you determine if and what types of infrastructure you need. And the best way to get anything accomplished is to kind of think about upcoming resurfacing projects or any way where you can combine costs. So if you do have anything like that, where you'd be restriping anyway, that can be an opportunity to think about what other striping and flex post materials can I wrap into that and accomplish some of these types of projects as well. ODOT has a really rich data set through its Transportation Information Mapping System, or TIMS, also its crash analysis tool called GCAT. There's webinars, 1-hour long trainings on how to use these, but this is a screenshot of the active transportation map viewer that has great information in it. I've highlighted the active transportation demand and need assessment. So this can be a tool that could help you prioritize where projects should be implemented first, or where if you have a long-term plan, but that's going to take a while to accomplish, looking at a quick build project in the interim are really key to do. As far as funding, Safe Routes to School, their non-infrastructure funding actually allows for planning and development of events or materials that promote walking and biking. So it could be used for some of that education and outreach. It also can be used for materials and staff time for quick build projects, lasting in that 1 to 3 years. So this is a funding source that is available to you. And then the HSIP abbreviated application is for non-complex, simple projects. And priority will be given to projects with a high injury severity and also given to pedestrian safety improvements. So that may be one to think about. The caveat is that you do need a project sponsor for the design and funding of this if you're going to apply for this type of funding. And then another resource is ODOT state purchasing contracts. So this is support for cost estimation and implementation, and you do have to become a member, but it is free to become a member. They have guidance on how you can pass an ordinance and complete enrollment to use these contracts. There's no fee for that. And this gives you access to contracts that can help you better procure contracts, and then also when we buy in bulk, we get better prices. So this is giving you a way to access some materials and implementation in a more cost-effective way. And if you're curious about this, this is on ODOT's website. There's a contact I would encourage you to reach out to. You can also see all the contracts that are available. So some that will be of interest to you are ones including flex post, pavement markings, RFBs, signing. You can also see what other cities are members of this. So if you see a city that you work with frequently, or maybe you have a contact at, you could reach out and say, have you used this? What's it been like? So I always like using my network to learn from others what their experience has been. So all of that information is available on the website for you. And with that, we have a couple of minutes for questions.
Yeah, so we actually haven't had any questions come into the question module yet. So if you do have a question on anything that we've talked about, go ahead and enter it into the questions, and we will answer them. Give it a second or so to come through, I guess.
Yeah.
Mario, we got a question about, is there a good resource to get estimates on the various treatments?
So ODOT does publish its contract bid data on its website. So you can download that. It usually has like the last 3 to 4 years of contract data, and you can search through that. It is listed in terms of bid items, but there's search tabs where you can just type in a description. You may have to try a couple of different ones if you're not as familiar with ODOT bid tabs, but that's a resource to look at. And I think most of the things that you would be interested in adding will be included in there. Sometimes I will reach out to other cities that have recently installed maybe an RFB, knowing that costs have been kind of in flux lately. So if they've done one recently, they might have some cost data or bids that they received that they could share with you as well. So definitely use some of your local contacts as well to get more current data, knowing how things can be in flux.
Great. We got another question about if you use large planters, does it need to be crash worthy? And I know we showed an example. I'm kind of broadening this about crash worthiness of barriers, but I know we showed an example of Jersey barriers, and that you still want to make sure that you're thinking through those those ends. We mentioned, we don't want to create another issue. We don't want to solve one issue and create another. So making sure that if you are using a Jersey barrier, that you're still thinking about how you're doing those endpoints so that they aren't a crash issue. For planters, we showed a few examples that they were in plastic pots. So that's a good workaround. I don't know, Mario, if you have any other thoughts on the crash worthiness of barriers.
Yeah, I mean, speed and context are relevant here. So if you have a high-speed roadway, um, and it's in a rural area, then thinking about clear zone requirements. But in our like Main Street areas, we can look at the urban offset, which allows, trees and other things to be within a certain distance from the curb or edge of those. And if it's lower speed, those are the guidelines that we can use. So using some of those plastic planters that will just break, they're not a fixed object, is a way to use those in those spaces and is appropriate given the speed and context of the area.
Yes, great. Another one was who painted the concrete barrier. I don't know if that's specific to the image we showed. And typically in my experience, and Mario, I'll give you a moment if you have any of yours as well, but in my experience, some of the communities have engaged like their arts council, or if they have some sort of arts committee that has come in and done that painting. I don't know if you've seen any of those specific around here.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly about the construction barriers. I know when there was some construction happening in one of the districts down here, they were using sort of like stickers over the portable barriers to make them, a little bit more fun than just neon orange everywhere. So that might be an idea to be able to liven those up. And then if you are considering painting in your curb extensions, there are methods and means that can make those longer lasting. So making sure you're working with someone that's actually done that painting on pavement before is something to check. And I think, at least if you're in the Columbus area, I want to say the Maroon Arts Group has done that before and is really successful with high quality treatments there. So they could be someone you could reach out to, but I'm sure there's others as well.
Great. The one thing that we did mention, I did mention retroreflectivity for signs, but I did not mention that also for your marking. So if you are doing edge lines, crosswalks, making sure that those are reflective, and the high friction. If there is any paint that you are putting down, the green paint or anything else, think through that high friction so that they're not slippery when wet. Another question is, how do you handle the public concern about, flexible delineator posts and the look of them? And I think, I can start, but, I think the thing here is that to engage the community as soon as you can, and Mariel gave some examples of some communities members able to step in and help with that, and coming up with different barrier treatments. And so the sooner you can engage the public and the stakeholders, if there is concern about the look of posts, they may be able to come with other suggestions, or they may have other options that they have access to. But I think the posts provide that clear, as a driver, if you're thinking about your driver perspective, they provide that clear, continuous line, and there's benefits to that as well from a roadway, user perspective and safety perspective. I don't know, Mario, if you have other.
Yeah, I know some communities think that they're ugly and they maybe aren't the most, they're not native plants and trees, but finding that common care point of why we're doing this and what the potential benefits are is a way to help people understand that, we're going to try to have public art and have natural plantings and things that are a part of that aesthetic, but these are also really key until we can do something more long term. And, I would flex posts, depending on how you install them, that's your first thing you need to think about is how are you attaching them to the pavement, because they can get ripped off easily depending on the method. So if it's intended to be in a little bit more long term, then think about that. Also have some on hand, because they're going to, especially at the beginning, you're going to have some knocked over while people are figuring this out, and be ready to install some back. And they don't have to go on the very, very edge. In the Columbus photos, you'll saw they had 2 white edge lines and then they were behind that. So that kind of helped balance, like, creating that visual piece, but also trying to keep them a little bit more clear of their trash trucks and things like that. So I think maintenance of them can help alleviate some of the aesthetic concerns as well.
Great. We have one more question. I know we're a little over, but what's most rewarding about these projects versus the larger reconstruction projects from a community perspective? And I think the community can see these, they can experience them in a quicker manner. When you identify a concern, you can quickly kind of get something out on the ground, and they can experience it, and you can tweak it, and you can really I think from the community perspective, they feel like they're part of the process a lot more than those reconstruction projects.
Yeah, and they're a really effective teaching tool, because lived expertise is wonderful to have. But sometimes because people are driving, they also think they're transportation engineers, and they have ideas on how to address stuff that may not always align with safety best practices. So this is a great way to say we want to help understand that concern, and we understand that, that's why you're asking for this X type treatment. But like, let us talk about why we think this one will work just as well or better, and give them the chance to see that, and then they can become, another expert in your community that understands a little bit better how to make their community safe as well.
Great. I think that answered all of the questions. As was mentioned, they'll follow up with the link to the presentation and video. So we appreciate your time and hope that you learned something new that you can implement in your community.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.